This is what I don't understand about this whole process, and what I think is so mind-boggling about it.
Yeah.
We don't have any coercive leverage over the Russians, and they're winning on the battlefield.
So recently, John Mearsheimer went on Daniel Davis's podcast and talked about the fact that the U.S. and Russia, Trump and Putin, are still miles apart when it comes to Ukraine, and why the upcoming meeting in Alaska between the two leaders probably won't pay dividends when it comes to securing peace in Ukraine. Let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
This is an opportunity for Putin to show the world that he is a reasonable statesman, and he can meet with Trump and he can talk in a civilized and smart manner. It's also an opportunity for him to explain to President Trump in person exactly what his demands are and why those demands are in large part non-negotiable. Seems to me that President Trump has not gotten the word on what real Russian demands are. And this is an opportunity for Putin to tell Trump about those demands. So it's a nice situation for Putin. And by the way, he gets to come to the United States. He's putting his feet in American territory, and that works to his political advantage at home and abroad. So Putin is not going to lose here, in my opinion, and therefore I think it made good sense for him to accept the invitation.
Now, ordinarily, one might suggest that for the president of the United States, if he convenes this big summit, especially on American territory, and then walks away with literally nothing and doesn't get any kind of either concession or agreement from the Russian side, that might be viewed as a loss. But this is not a normal presidency. This is not a normal time. How do you see from the President Trump side if the expected happens and nothing is agreed to by anyone after Friday?
I think it's going to damage Trump. I think it's important to understand that Trump had a honeymoon period. It lasted a couple months. And I think we're now past the honeymoon period. And I think people are beginning to look at what Trump has accomplished. And on the foreign policy front, he's been largely unsuccessful, especially with regard to settling the Ukraine war.
Yeah, I have to agree with Mearsheimer here completely. You know, remember back in March or whatever it was when Zelensky went to the White House, acted entitled to the U.S. Treasury, wanted security guarantees, unilateral ones from the United States, and Trump said, "You have no cards here, you're playing with millions of lives." Well, that mentality didn't stick. Trump didn't seem to want to depart, and it actually looks like it's Trump that doesn't have any cards. He doesn't have any hand to play. He's tried the sanctions. He's tried to basically use rhetoric that was indistinguishable from Biden's rhetoric toward Putin, saying, you know, he wants to conquer all of Ukraine and he's going to get it unless we continue to fund this war. He's tried to have this gambit where he accepts a mineral deal with Ukraine, despite the fact that that would rely on territory that Russia occupies in the Donbass. All this is foolhardy, and I have to agree with Mearsheimer. His base is not accepting his policies in Ukraine, which again are basically indistinguishable from Biden. Outside of opening negotiations, which is a good thing, I'll commend him for that, he hasn't given up what he would need to for a peace here, and that's to pledge no Ukraine in NATO, demilitarize Ukraine. Acknowledge the Russian possessions, especially in Crimea and in the Donbass, which they now occupy something like 90% of, and denazification. Those are the demands. They've always been Russian demands. It's not a mystery.
You remember he said before he was even in the White House that he was going to shut this one down, maybe before he moved in, but certainly right after he moved in. And not only has he not shut it down, but he's facing a real problem. We haven't talked about this, but events on the battlefield are turning against Ukraine. And one can only wonder what the situation on the battlefield will look like on Friday when the two leaders get together, and what the consequences of that will be for their meeting.
Yeah, there's been a renewed Russian offensive, and that's been in the news the last few days. You're not hearing coverage of that. And there were also widespread protests in Ukraine a few weeks ago, too, against Zelensky, some of which are kind of standing up to him for the first time because they've been squashed by the government in so many cases before this. Remember, Zelensky outlawed rival political parties, shut down adversarial media agents, things like that, all while the U.S. keeps beating the propaganda drum that we're in Ukraine to defend democracy. It's garbage, just as it always was.
The Ukrainians, and we can get into this, of course, are really in bad shape. The Russians are doing very well on the battlefield, unexpectedly so. And this, I think, will put Putin in an even stronger position on Friday than we anticipated a week ago.
What do you think this changing view from Trump has what effect does that have on the Russians as they're heading into Friday?
The Russians have seen this kind of behavior, as we have, over and over. There's nothing surprising here. And what the Russians, I am sure, understand is you're not going to get a meaningful agreement on Friday. You're not going to get a meaningful agreement the next Friday or the Friday after that. And this one is going to be settled on the battlefield. And what you want to do if you're the Russians is that you want to go to great lengths to present yourself to the rest of the world and to President Trump as a reasonable statesman. And you want to be willing to talk to Trump if he wants to talk to you.
Yeah, I got to agree with them. Trump's been erratic as far as his rhetoric toward this. At one moment he's antagonizing Russia, basically boasting about the attack on the nuclear bombers, despite saying, hey, there's nothing the U.S. knew about that, and continuing to, just defer to Lindsey Graham and Keith Kellogg and people around him that say, hey, we need to keep this fight going. It's wise money well spent because American boys aren't out there fighting the Russians themselves after all, and trying to position himself in a manner of strength, but there's no possible way to salvage any strength when, again, the Donbass is Russian control. The sanctions haven't done anything. The threat of secondary sanctions haven't done anything, especially as they pertain to India, a country which, by the way, I wouldn't antagonize if I were the United States. They're the most pro-U.S. BRICS country, and Trump historically has had good relations with Modi, but that might be thrown out the window over all this. So, yeah, I agree with Mearsheimer.
But there's no hope here that you're going to get a meaningful agreement. The best that could happen is that Trump would agree to Russian demands, and he would tell the Europeans and the Ukrainians, you can either accept Russian demands or not. But if you don't accept them, I'm out of here. And it's up to you to negotiate and deal with the Russians. But he's not going to do that, in large part because he's surrounded, Trump is, by advisors who won't allow him to do that.
And correct, that would be a better agreement than he could have expected at this point, given that Russia's carved in that region, has had military success, and there's no real evidence of Ukrainian gains in terms of territory since over a year ago. All of their offensive from 2024 has been pushed back, essentially, and we're still dumping money into there. So yeah, even if Trump doesn't want to agree to all of the demands, he doesn't seem to be willing to give in to the most important, which is the pledge that they can't be part of NATO, withdraw NATO equipment, demilitarization, and denazification. The Azov is still integrated into this military, and despite the fact that lots of the liberal establishment wants to call everyone and their mother a Nazi, these are the actual Nazis that the U.S. is supporting monetarily.
Keith Kellogg and Marco Rubio and others will whisper in his ear.
Lindsey Graham among those.
Yeah, he listens to all those people. And as long as he continues to listen to all those people, when he gets on the phone and he talks, or gets on Zoom and talks to people like Zelensky, and the German chancellor, he's going to end up sounding like he did today.
And it's. I thought on Sunday, Vice President Vance was on U.S. television and said, "We're done funding this war. If the Europeans want to do it, they can do it. We're looking for a resolution, but we're done funding this war." So I thought he was actually laying the groundwork for Trump to do exactly as you suggested there by saying, "Here's a deal, take it or leave it. We're leaving." But now it doesn't sound like Trump is going to do that, because the question is going to be, after the expected happens on Friday and there's no kind of deal on any terms at all, what is Trump going to be left with? Is he going to be going back to, well, we'll just keep funding, or is he going to go back to, well, then we're going to put sanctions on you? I mean, what are the options for Trump?
More of the same. I mean, what else can he do? I would just say, by the way, I think Vance is the one person at the higher echelons of this administration who understands what has to be done. But he's badly outnumbered, and he does not want to get too far out in front on this issue. So he's more or less in the background, and he does not have that much influence on Trump.
Yeah, I hate to say I generally agree. I think he does understand it better than Trump. He's more involved in the deeper particulars of this issue than Trump, clearly, and he isn't surrounded directly with Keith Kellogg and Marco Rubio. I guess he's in the same cabinet as Rubio, but Trump is taking Rubio's advice and not Vance's. And even if that's good rhetoric, it won't matter if it doesn't manifest in good policy. If it really is the fact that the U.S. is done funding this war good, that's what will end this war, by the way. And that's what will cause, the America First mantra to actually be palpable again and, relatable. But I don't know that that's going to happen. And Vance risks looking bad if Trump continues to fund this war after this meeting, which I don't have high hopes for securing a peace for all the reasons that Mearsheimer's laying out.
And the end result is we are where we are, and we're just going to continue to play this game for the foreseeable future diplomatically that leads nowhere, and the war is going to be settled on the battlefield, as you and I have said on countless occasions. Who is he going to put sanctions on? He's going to put sanctions on China? He can't do that. The Chinese control the flow of rare earths to the United States, and they send magnets to the United States that we desperately need. The Chinese have all sorts of coercive leverage over us. And the Indians, the other country that matters here with regard to secondary sanctions, the Indians have made it clear that they cannot agree to Trump's demands. So what is secondary sanctions going to do?
Exactly nothing. The same thing all sanctions have done in this, not change the battlefield conditions whatsoever. This is just beating around the bush. The issues at the heart of this thing that have always been known to people that have studied this issue. Trump won't talk about them. He won't talk about Ukraine's NATO status. He's only talked about Crimea once or twice in this entire administration. He won't talk about Donbass possessions, and he won't talk about the failed peace that Zelensky could have had in Istanbul weeks after this war began, where again Putin showed an interest in securing peace through amicable terms that didn't result in the loss of maybe over 1 million Ukrainians, if depending on the stats that you look at, without the desecration of so much land and property, without the crackdowns on civil liberties that have happened in Ukraine during this time, without U.S. taxpayer money being dumped in there.
And in terms of arming the Ukrainians, he's already arming the Ukrainians. He hasn't shut down the Biden pipeline, and he's told the Europeans they can buy American equipment and ship it to the Ukrainians, which is just a way of saying that American equipment will continue to be sent to Ukraine. It'll just go via Europe, and the Europeans will pay for it, but the Ukrainians are still going to get the weaponry.
Yeah, that's the most disastrous thing. If your solution to get out of this proxy war is to just make it a double proxy war, a proxy where the weapons are sent to Europe and then Europe sends the weapons to Ukraine and then those weapons are used against the Russians, our relations with Russia don't improve. Our money is still wasted on these fruitless things. The pockets of Lockheed Martin and Raytheon are still lined, despite the fact that they provide no service of value to the American people that are financing all this garbage. It just becomes the same kind of policy, just passing through another corridor. That is a disastrous situation that could not be sold as non-interventionist or a desirable outcome to this at all.
I just don't understand what he can do. The guy doesn't have any options. This is what I don't understand about this whole process, and what I think is so mind-boggling about it.
Yeah.
We don't have any coercive leverage over the Russians, and they're winning on the battlefield. And the idea that Trump is going to go to Alaska on Friday and get all these concessions from the Russians, and then if the Russians don't make these concessions, he's going to lower the boom on them. What is he talking about? It just shows you where American foreign policy is at.
It does, and I rather fear that this is just Trump's way to placate his domestic constituents that he needs to have on his side. But then it would also seem to completely bypass what you thought was his reason for having this meeting at all, was just so he could get out of having to have sanctions. But now seems like he's circled himself back around into the same corner to where now he is going to have to do those, whether he wanted to or not. Towards what end, neither of us can figure out.
I think you're exactly right. He does look like he's back at square one.
It does. All the options that seem to be on the table don't seem to be those at the root of this conflict that have always been part of this conflict. NATO's expansionistic tendencies, Trump's withdrawing from the INF treaty, Trump's decision to fund Ukraine, even in his first term, with offensive weapons to the tune of $400 million. And again, it looked good on the campaign trail to some extent when he kept talking about that I just want people to stop dying. But he's never been willing to pursue policies that will allow people to stop dying. And that hasn't changed at all. That's why he keeps going back to these sanctions and secondary tariffs and things like that haven't paid dividends for the Americans who want to actually get out of this war. And that's what we're left with. And there's no other solution than that. It might be eating a maggot sandwich if you're part of the deep state that wants this thing going for 20 years like Iraq and Afghanistan were, at least, and with higher stakes in this avenue. But it's just like Julian Assange always said, they don't want a successful war. They want an endless war. They want a constant money stream that washes money out of the taxpayer base of the United States, including the middle class, and funnels it straight into the coffers of the military-industrial complex. All for nonsense and brinksmanship with Russia, which is something that is not beneficial to the American public. But I do want to hear what you guys have to say. Is Mearsheimer right about this? Let me know down below. Do you think any fruitful circumstances will come from this meeting with Putin in Alaska for Trump? Let me know down below. And will Trump's base start to really eat into him over this Ukraine issue if no concessions are made and no peace deal or ceasefire is agreed to in Alaska? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Daniel Davis. Really appreciate his show and his interview with Mearsheimer. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. They're the members only videos. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire, even in Ukraine. All right, peace out, guys. I hope you take it easy. I'll catch you in the next one.